Eric, for introducing me. I actually had a person I put myself in because I didn't have time to find another speaker, but I'll go real quick. I don't know. Just raise your hand to see who I'm talking to here. Horses, hay. Anybody concerned with those things? 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we got 4. What's that? Are you interested in those things? Any education about them? Okay, there you go. Is that a different question? Okay. Well, normally, in some of the past, I've had a whole front row of horse owners that were really focused. And so I put this in here, but it also lets me know how in-depth I need to go into a few things. So. Because I don't want to inundate you with much. But the first thing I want to start with is, let's talk about this. This looks pretty familiar. We raise a lot of this in Gunnison. But I want to talk to you about hay, because it's one of my most frustrating things I deal with as a county ag agent, and people not knowing enough about this stuff. And how it interacts with their horses and how they feed it, whether it's cows or horses or goats, or we haven't even talked about yaks very much, but that 8 pounds a day is pretty fascinating to me. So that's something that really perked me up. But hays and horses. So the first thing is how do we evaluate hay? Well, the best way is to go through a full-blown hay analysis that you come and see me. But that's not how hay is marketed. It's not what people normally do. The biggest way that people buy hay is trust from the person they're buying it from. The biggest thing they do is they call in, I need some hay. Well, if you find somebody that has some hay, that's a win, number one. Number two is they tell you, it's horse hay, or it's dairy hay, or it's just some old cow hay. Well, what are those? What are those things? And that's where my frustration lies, because horse hay is not horse hay over here. There's so much variability in it, and cow hay can be incredibly premium type hay, even if it's brown on the outside. And so with that's where all the misconception comes into buying hay. But here's some quick things that I want to tell you guys about, because I don't want to go way over time. Just quick and easy. If you have the ability to see the hay before you buy it, that's number one, a good thing, okay? Does it feel good? Do you feel good? Yeah. No, I don't know. Does it feel good to me? So I'm going to put my hand in it. Well, nothing's really poking me. It feels pretty good. It's not real soft. But it's not scratchy. Probably going to be a good hay. I've got some over here. I've got 2 kinds of hay here. I don't know if you guys can see it. And that's pretty stemmy and pretty stickery. So you can feel it, and there's a difference. Horses would probably prefer the better feel. Smell. So I'm going to smell it. And it smells really good. It smells sweet. It's a good smell to me. In the 1950s, the number one smell in the country was fresh cut hay. 1960s, 70s, we went to straight pizza, and it's been pizza from then on. But it used to be fresh cut hay, and that's what everybody liked. But it needs to smell good, and that's when we get into horses aren't real big fans of mold and mildew. And when you start getting that musty smell, then it's probably the horses aren't going to agree with it a whole lot. Look. Most people don't really look at their hay except for the color. Is it green? Is it brown? Is it black? We don't need to be feeding black hays. But when you branch over into that silage world, there's some black hays that are pretty good. But actually, the green that you see is carotenoids and basically just vitamin A. It has nothing to do with the protein content. It has nothing to do with the energy content or the sugar or the calories or anything like that. And so the green you see is attractive, and that's why most people say, oh, it's a good green horse hay. And, well, horses will eat yellow hay. But when I say look at it, look past the green. Actually, pull stuff out. And this is where you become educated a little bit. You start to see all the little seed heads. If we're putting in, I'm trying to find some good ones here. But, you start to find some seed heads, and you're like, well, what is that? And that's where your education kind of comes into play. If you want to bring a bale of hay to me, bring it to me, and I'll tell you what's in it. But I know that that's meadow foxtail. Do you know the difference between meadow foxtail and foxtail barley and red top? Or do you know the difference in alfalfa, what alfalfa looks like? Because that's scattered around. Do you know what maybe red top clover looks like or Alsike clover looks like? We have a lot of diversity in our hays, and that's a fun part of getting to know your bales of hay and what you're actually feeding your horses. Now, we may have some hays with some Timothy in them, and boy, isn't that the golden child of horse hay is Timothy. So you go to Tractor Supply. Oh, this is another fun point. I Googled on Tractor Supply and typed in horse. How many feeds do you think that Tractor Supply has for horses? What's that? 137. So, and granted, probably 40 of those are treats for horses, and that's a whole nother political story that we get into. And we do, guys, have to realize that there are different reasons for people raising horses. There's working horses all the way to pets. And just like that's why the dog food market, there's 3 aisles at Tractor Supply of dog food, and same thing with our horses. We have about 3 aisles of feed for horses. Now, those of you that, I know Lee Spann was in here, but I have a hard time thinking that Lee Spann is in Tractor Supply buying horse feed all the time. What do you think he feeds all the time? Straight. And then he probably has a salt block out for him. And when you drive by that, do you think he works his horses in the summertime? Up and down the mountains. There may be a pet factor in the summertime when it's like, I've worked you all day in the rain and you're sweating or whatever. I'm going to give you some grain or a scoop of grain, but that's probably it, right? So hay is a very good commodity. I don't want to get too much into that, but identify it. Look at the hay. Is it something? The other thing you can tell is, well, here's a weed. I may not even know what that weed is, but there are a lot of weeds in here. Well, that may not even be a weed. That's probably a clover leaf. But the other thing is there's some of this usually in there. Does anybody know what that is? So horse apples are a lot of times in our hay, right? And so, yeah, there's always some poop in there. Does it ruin the hay? No, it usually just falls out, and the horses won't eat it. But actually, this is alfalfa over here on the left, and meadow pasture here in the valley on the right. So I encourage you to come smell it. If you've never smelled hay or know what good hay smells like, I think that's about as close as it comes. And then obviously listen to the hay. No, I shouldn't have put that up there. What's that? I never even thought about that. I have sat in the hayfield quite a bit. I don't think I'm talking to the hay, though. It's probably just to get out of the house. But little quick thing. I know this is hard to see, but the blue up there is a horse's requirement, and the green up there is what the average Gunnison meadow hay produces. And so the only key factor on this to know is the very end of the bars. That's why Lee Spann only feeds hay, is because They're getting plenty of protein out of the hay. They're getting plenty of energy out of the hay. They're getting tons of calcium because our hays are high in calcium, sometimes too high in calcium when we start to think about what calcium and phosphorus kind of as a ratio needs to be. That's why we also always just throw out a mineral block or a 12-12, 1-to-1 calcium to phosphorus mineral block because it balances that ratio out of calcium to phosphorus. Then I just threw in there for fun because it fit on my graph. Magnesium and potassium, you can see there's plenty of potassium in our hays and different things. So when horse owners come and it's like, what should I be feeding my horse? Or you start to get into things like, well, why are you feeding it extra? And now there are times that you need to feed it extra, but you need to know why you're doing that. And if you don't know, then come see me. Don't just take any kind of nutritional thing off the internet and try to figure it out, because the horse is pretty specific. And this is probably where we get into the most challenges with our horse is the feeding system. This is where horse owners find the most frustration. This is going to be their first vet visit. I worked for an equine veterinarian in Texas for probably 5 years, and we just liquidated on the family place, 298 horses. I should probably preface that there's a little expertise that I have, not much, because it's from Texas, right? And Texas A&M. But there is a little expertise that I bring. My family, big ranch in Texas, a lot of horses, stand, a bunch of studs. And so I've fed horses a long time and quite a bit in my life. And all stages of horses, everything from the colts to heavy working, cutting horses, to old brood mares and tough studs. So I just want to say that. But anyway, working for that equine veterinarian, for one, he said, to start out with, there's nothing right about the horse's digestive system. And I agree. I've looked at a lot of digestive systems because I got a master's in ruminant nutrition or cattle nutrition at A&M. And I love the capybara, studied that little rodent forever because he's an incredible ruminant. But I digress. The horse is not like any other creature's digestive system. And for all practical purposes, it's really messed up. It doesn't make sense. It's not efficient, and it has some big challenges. I think it's fine with the wild design that it was intended for, which is free range, constant grazer, eating all sorts of varieties of different things on the open range. Now, no horse that we raise now fits that description for the most part. So we put them in stalls. We put big round bales of hay in front of them and leave them for 2 months. And so there's a lot of challenges. But back to the situation we have. So take a look at this. This is his basic digestive system. He eats through here. This animal can't throw up. Well, that's a big problem right off the bat. If they have an upset stomach and you can't throw up, it's not going to fix itself till it gets all the way through the system. That's a trouble. We have a small stomach with an animal that's eating very bulky feed. So if you think about hay, a horse would go through that, and it's trying to put that through a system that's just about a 5-gallon or a 3-gallon stomach. So you have and this is I could talk about that real quick, but let me go back. But this stomach is small, but it's right there. So you got all this hay coming in, goes into the stomach. This is where we get into huge trouble with, all of a sudden the horse gets into the feed room, and it goes to wolfing down, 20 gallons of grain. And all of a sudden then they have a huge starch overload or sugar overload, and they get really messed up. And then it goes through the small intestine, at a pretty rapid rate. And the small intestine isn't really attached to anything in a horse. They're sort of attached to themselves, but there's no real attachment to any of the body cavity or anything like that. So they have a tendency to twist and turn, and they can kink. And so there again, if it's a constant grazing and a constant flow of food going through that animal, it's pretty nice. If all of a sudden you go 5 hours without food and then put another big hunk of food in there, now you have a wave coming through here where all of a sudden you can start to see that there could be some kinking, some different things. So horses are messed up on that end. And then finally they come into a huge chamber called the cecum, which is kind of our appendix, which we could be eating feed or hay too if we had an appendix like that. We just like to cut ours out when it gets infected. But so you have an appendix here that is a vat that is a fermentation chamber. So that's your rumen for the cow. Now it's not as efficient as a rumen in a cow, but the cecum does provide that horse the ability to break down that fiber and get some good things out of it. But you have to have a healthy bug population in there. And then it goes through the large intestine, and that's where your water gets pulled out and so forth, and then it comes out the back end. But the problem with having a fermentation chamber kind of towards the back of the digestive system is that you don't get the efficiency that you would by having that fermentation chamber at the front of the system. And so that's why dogs really do like to eat horse poop a lot. It's because there's a lot more protein in a horse's poop, and there's a lot of energy too that the animal never did get to utilize. And so with that, that's horse digestion 101. Cool thing about the stomach is that, well, another mess up right off the bat is that the stomach isn't lined all the same. The stomach has two different linings. There's a lining up here that's not real conducive on the top of the stomach. The lining's not real conducive to acid. Well, it's a stomach. It has a lot of acid in it, which that's not real good. But usually as long as there's roughage coming in that horse, then it buffers that area. And so you end up kind of with a real acidic flavor down here in a lined stomach that can handle it. But up here at the top, if you don't have that constant kind of grass in the system, that's when you get into some ulcerations and some burning and some colic issues on that side of it. So I just like to put that in there. And then I wanted to explain a little bit about plant cells. A big thing about plant cells, don't read any of the words, I'll point to them. The plant cells have a wall around them. And that cell wall has a lot of energy and even a lot of protein within that cell wall. Now, you and I can't digest that, but that's where the fermentation chamber comes into effect and can digest that animal's feed. And so bugs in the animal's stomach, or in that cecum, can actually break down this green and yellow cell wall, and the inner part of that cell wall has a lot of energy in it in a product called hemicellulose. And then the outer cell wall has a lot of lignin, if you think about woody material, but lignin and then cellulose that aren't as highly digestible, and they don't get as much sugar out of those as they do the hemicellulose, but there still is a value to it. Just to think about horses, because I deal a lot with small acreage owners and help them try to figure out their horse problems. A big one is that they don't understand that a horse will walk 3 miles a day grazing, and that's a lot of hoof traffic if they're trying to put them in a little 1 acre trap. 3 miles is a lot of traffic over that place. Another thing is that horses are selective grazers. And they have 2 rows of teeth, so they can actually really nub down the grass to the very bottom. Unlike a cow that's really more ripping off their feed because they only have 1 set of teeth in the bottom, the horse has 2, so it's like us. So they can nub the grass down to the bottom, but the problem with that is that they also like to do what we call a latrine-style grazing. So there's pooping and peeing in certain areas, and they don't like to eat from those areas. And so you end up with grass, this high, and you end up with grass this high. And so that can be a problem. So horse management is huge if you don't have a large acreage to put the horses on. It can be managed quite well, but it definitely needs managing for most people. So do you have any questions about that? Did we all learn something?
What's the pros and cons of, I understand horses need to go out and graze all the time, but for people that have, like you say, the little 1 acre spot or a corral from me to you, the feeding system they do to keep a healthy horse. I mean, because the horses need to eat all the time unless they're working, but when people just, they throw them a flake or 2, and then like you said, they're gonna have a twisted gut or something because then there's that space in there, they get a whole bunch of more food in there. So can you explain just a little bit better how people need to feed their horses so they don't get that twisted gut?
The twisted gut doesn't happen all the time. I have a lot of people that feed 1 time a day, just put out a bunch of feed for the horse, and then the horse starves all through the night, and then the next morning there's a whole nother ton of hay out there. Sometimes it's fine, but with that, with horses, the more times you can break it up, the better. If you can feed 3 times a day, great. If you can feed 2 times a day, that's okay. That's pretty good. That's what most people do. If you can feed 1 time a day, then you better please be putting out enough hay, okay? Because you don't want them to go through that hay and then have 8 hours of not having hay out there. So another factor goes into just make sure you're feeding that horse enough that day. Yeah. Good question. Okay, 1,200-pound horse, and there are some horse requirements right here, if you would like. Another fun fact, let's just bring it down. It's different, depending on the hay and the energy values you want to get out, and how much they can eat and how much they should eat is probably 2 separate things. They can, and it also depends on their stage of production or where they're at with their stage of life too. A lactating horse can eat about twice as much as a horse that isn't lactating. So if you take a maintenance horse, that's going to be about 2% of their body weight is about all they can eat. And fun fact about horses, we'll have a couple of these, I guess. Fun fact about horses, it really doesn't matter the quality of this hay. They'll eat the same amount. That's different than horses. I mean, it's different than cattle. Cattle, the higher the digestibility and the higher calorie-dense hay is, the more that the cow can eat. That's why dairy cows can eat like 50 pounds of hay if it's the right energy type feed. Horses aren't that way. They can only eat a certain amount. However, the caveat to that is unless it's pelleted. If it's pelleted or a grain, they can wolf down a lot more. But from the system, it can only eat a certain amount because of the way the system's set up. And it doesn't have to do with the digestibility. But 2% to answer your question. And 2.5% to 3% on your lactating mares. With that being said, if you do own horses, how many calories a day does a horse need? How many calories do you guys need a day? 2,000? That's debatable on me. I can probably get by with about 500. But 2,000, yeah, that's roughly what everybody says is our daily caloric intake that we need. So what do you think a 1,200-pound horse would need? I can tell you it's about 35 Big Macs is what a horse needs, okay? Or 16.5 to 17,000 calories. And I do try to steer people to that thought process. A horse, just how many calories does it need? How many calories does that have? You know, I can tell you 1 pound of that feed right there has 1,000 calories to a horse. To you, you can get about 20 calories out of that. You know, maybe a little more than that. But so when you start to think about actual calories, then it does bring it to a place that sometimes you can understand. But lactating mare needs about 50 or 60 Big Macs. Well, or Impossible Whoppers. I don't know how many calories are in the Impossible Whopper, but if you do want to know what a horse requires, I've got sheets up here that I'll sure hand you. So with that, if all the other speakers maybe want to come up here, and we'll ask some questions to everybody.